trip was made in the fall of 1948 for the purpose of studying the sugar beet industry in the northern European countries. In that section of Europe, there are some 2 1/3 million acres of beets being raised. The countries visited were England, Belgium, Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, American and British zones in Germany, France, and Ireland. The trip actually starts from New York, where we see the deep canyons of the business district of Manhattan Island from the Empire State Building, leaving a prosperous, energetic America. A new B-36 Army bomber flies around the top of the 102-story building to remind us of the power of America and the new things to come. The world is indeed a small place, as it only takes 13 hours from the airport at LaGuardia Field to England in one of the Constellation planes. It flies in the stratosphere at 15,000 to 18,000 feet across the Atlantic Ocean. We dip down out of the clouds and see some of the rural sections of western England. We arrive in England on Defense of Britain Day, and there are some 55,000 people lined up to welcome us at Heathrow Airport, west of London. London has very interesting double-decker buses, wagons, and cars that make the downtown district a busy city where 7.5 million people live. We visit the world's oldest agricultural experiment station, established in England in 1835. The administration building is very old. The rock symbolizes the establishment of the station by Sir John Laws. Among the many interesting experiments is one on the importance of manure to soil structure, which has run for over 100 years. Note the improvement in the condition of the soil which received the organic fertilizer. Bolters were exceedingly bad in beet fields in England this year because of a cold spring which started the seed stalks to shoot. In order to eliminate these in mechanical harvesting, some farmers used a Halme destroyer, which has 2 sets of blades that can be varied in height from the ground. A John Deere model number 54 beet harvester performed very satisfactorily after a Halme destroyer removes the thick, heavy seed stalks of the beets. In England, it is necessary for the farmers to protect their grain very carefully because of the dampness and the wet weather. Practically all of the barley is put under sheds like these to await winter threshing. The most popular harvester in England was the catch-pole single-row harvester. This machine is a double-disc topper and puts the beets in small piles that are much like windrows at right angles to the beet row. Over 200 of these machines operated in 1948. An experimental catch-pole machine employs a cart principle which dumps the beets at the ends of the field. A harvester demonstration was held under the good auspices of the English Crown. A total of 24 different machines were shown, many of them from other countries. Nearly 5,000 people witnessed the demonstrations, and there were many good machines in evidence. This is a Min's harvester, which performed fairly well. Another French machine with a cart and a Moreau harvester, which is quite popular in France. A 2-row Danish topper did a very acceptable job with a 24-inch diameter saw-type blade. As can be seen, the topping is excellent. This was pulled by 1 horse, as was also the single-row topper of the same make, which did a very presentable job and has possibilities for the American farmer, as can be seen by the good results in topping. Many other machines such as this robot harvester digging 2 rows at a time, and also the 1-row machine scrolling the beets freer of dirt, presented a very good idea of European harvesting. English beet growers are insisting on mechanical harvesting, but only about 2% of the beets in 1948 were so harvested. They are determined, however, to keep up a good start. In one respect, however, the British are ahead of Americans in handling beet tops. These 2 silos on Lord Townsend's estate show some very good evidence of proper handling of that valuable crop. In fact, many British farmers insist on a machine for topping the beets first in order to harvest that crop first. Many British farmers are not satisfied just working by daylight, but work far into the twilight in order to get the maximum tonnage harvested by the machines. Typical England is filled with rolling hills, hedges, and stone fences. There are large estates, such as the Duke of Bedford's, where herds of deer, which represent the last of an almost extinct strain of Asiatic deer known as Pear David, play on the grassy slopes. We see a typical English country house with a thatched roof and surrounded by flowers on the way back to London. And view some of the terrible effects of the bombing of England. The hospital shown is just across the Thames River from the government buildings. Parliament buildings with Westminster Abbey in the back. A couple of hours by air and we are in Belgium, where we see new hand-topping devices which are becoming quite popular with growers because they hold the tops cleanly as they're swept off from the roots. This is followed with a new type spring-action digger, which permits the worker to dig the beets by hand more rapidly than the former 2-tined fork. The hand-topped beets are generally rather deeply crowned, as shown here, with a worker hurrying through on his bicycle to get to work faster. Tops, always the first crop harvested, are being gathered into a horse cart. The Belgians handle the tops very carefully and very rapidly after they are removed to conserve the maximum feed value. The beet tops are then taken immediately to a large silo pit and unloaded. Part of the tops are kept for a year or until the next beet harvest rolls around and are treasured very carefully. In fact, probably more than the beet roots. For hundreds of years, the Belgians have been noted for their fine horses. This is the champion stud in the show in Belgium in 1948. The bull and cow pulling a cart indicates the measures required to sustain operations. The people use horse and milk cow combinations, since the Germans, during their occupation of the country, eliminated a lot of the better horses. Note the difficulty in handling such a team. Milk cows. Vegetable gardens are common in the neighborhood of small towns and cities. The Belgian beet grower contracts 4 to 5 acres each year, and there are about 125,000 acres of beets this year that will average 17 tons per acre. Here is a typical Belgian sugar factory near Liège. It is not necessary to point out that, among other things, the manure pit on the typical Belgian farm has been responsible for 1,000 years of maintenance of the farm fertility. It is just a short distance from Belgium to Netherlands, where we see the typical windmills pumping water and grinding grain, as they have for centuries. It has been said that the Lord made the earth, but the Dutch made Holland. This is quite typical of the spirit of the Dutch, as shown in the neighborhood of Rotterdam, where over 3,000 acres of greenhouses are established for growing tomatoes, cucumbers, grapes, and even pears in the rather cold climate and short season. Much commerce is carried on by means of barges in the hundreds of miles of canals in the Netherlands where the fruits of agriculture are carried to market. While we were there, the first shipload of Irish cattle were received from Ireland since the war and were driven through the streets of Rotterdam. This occasioned an increase of 1 gram of meat per week for each Dutch person. Certainly a joyful occasion. Bicycles and more bicycles are the vehicle of transportation. The farmers prize beet tops above all of their crops, as it furnishes feed and fodder for their livestock. Because of the need for feed, the beets are topped generally quite deep, as shown here. The Dutch feel that the best way to make good silage is to alternate layers of beet tops and clover hay. A pit silo about 30 inches deep is dug, and a layer of hay is placed over the bottom. Next come the tops. And note the good clean top shown by this farmer, who wears the typical wooden shoes of the rural areas. The cart of tops is driven right over the pit to assist in packing the silage, and you can see the haystack in the background, which is utilized at the same time the tops are being spread uniformly over the pit. When the silage is settled, it is ordinarily about 10 feet deep. The head of the Netherlands Beet Institute talks with the farmer to get information about the high value of the beet tops and clover silage, which is the basic ration for fattening cattle on this farm. Another farmer shows silage which is a year old and points out the alternate layers of hay and beet tops that have packed together to form an excellent feed, which is so highly prized. The 116,000 acres in the Netherlands, there's a great deal of hand digging of beets, accomplished with a two-tined fork, with the beets put in windrows which are not disturbed after topping. Wet earth and dampness of the atmosphere cause difficulty in properly drying out beans for threshing. They're placed in a cross-staked arrangement covered with sheaves of grain. We leave a typical windmill scene in Netherlands at sundown to go to Denmark. Passing over the cloudy sky and looking down at Helgoland and the Baltic Sea on our way to Copenhagen. Here, a long line of Danish flags in the streets advertises that there is a huge British exposition showing the goods that Britain has to sell to Denmark. We leave Copenhagen and see old windmills that are 200 and 300 years old. A typical old-type farmyard, which is built in a square with a cobblestone courtyard. Here, the farmer keeps his livestock and his hay, and also lives in the same set of buildings, which in an early day served for protection from marauders and robbers. Other thatched farmhouses bear out that they are warm in winter as well as cooler in the summer. This one is quite old. We move next to look at a famous castle built in the 1500s at Fredensborg, which was the home of Danish kings for many years and was one of the most beautiful castles seen in Europe. It is built on an island and has 3 moats around it to prevent attack. The beautiful fountain in the courtyard is a duplicate of one taken in war with Sweden about 100 years ago. The present king lives at Christiansborg and is guarded with very decorative soldiers, as you can see. By bus, we cross a long bridge connecting two of the large Danish islands, and go to Lolland Island. Here, most of the beets are raised, and one horse generally is used in pulling beets because the Germans did not leave much power equipment. The beets are received mostly at individual farm sidings and are hand shoveled. But here, the beets are being handled with a more modern system. A small railroad engine moves cars holding 3 or 4 tons of beets per load to the juice stations. Let's see how they look when we back them up. They really step right along, don't they? Tear samples are taken by a fork from the railroad car into a wicker basket, and then the car is dumped by hydraulic system into a carrier. This moves the beets up into a pile where they can be picked up by a clamshell machine. Each farmer is required to take a definite proportion of his pulp back, and at the factory, horses are used to move the small cars for loading. At other places where the beets are received on islands, they are loaded from barges into the farmer's wagon. And still other places, the farmer comes and gets his pulp directly. The pressed pulp, which contains about 10% dry matter, is much prized by the Danish farmers, who store it in pits at their farms. We take to the air again for a 15-minute hop to Sweden. The Swedish flag flies over a people who have tried to maintain neutrality in 2 world wars. The Swedes have long been noted as good mechanics and are endeavoring to build a new type harvesting machine which has a scroll that not only elevates the beets, but rubs off dirt which might be clinging to the roots. The puller points are outside of the tractor wheel and swing in and out with a beet row for guiding. The machine has definite possibilities in Sweden. Only 5 of these machines have been built, however, and practically all of the beet harvest consists of digging by hand, topping by hand, and forking both tops and beets into trailers and carts. Hey, not so fast, mister. This system the Swedes are determined to eliminate as far as possible. The handling of the tops is considered first. Here we see the tops that are on trailers ready for elevating into the top of a barn. Here they are fed green to dairy cattle that are kept in the barn for 7 months without any exercise. Rope nets are used to put in the bottom of the trailer for elevating the tops either into a pit silo or a barn loft. Many of the beet receiving systems are quite modern. The farmers drive their truck or cart onto a raised platform for unloading into a hopper that elevates the beets onto a steel belt to distribute them over flumes. Other beets come in railroad cars and are handled through a wet hopper system into flumes. The beet pulp is then loaded back into the railroad cars and taken back to the farmer daily. We travel by air again over clouds where we see an unusual rainbow caused by the refraction of light on ice particles. The shadow of the plane is in the center on the clouds. We see the beautiful city of Stockholm from the air, which is built on 23 islands. Stockholm from a high elevation is certainly a beautiful place and is the capital of Sweden. The town hall with a large gold ball on the tower is a very characteristic architecture, and unlike most of this old city, it is only 40 years old. We fly next to Hamburg, Germany, and see the much-bombed airport, and then on to Frankfurt, which is now a city of about 750,000 people, much larger than before the war in spite of the heavy bombing by American planes. The city is about 2/3 destroyed and is a pitiful example of the results of war. The population of Western Germany, controlled by American and British, is twice that of before the war because of the exodus from the Russian zone. The housing problems are beyond imagination, with addition of millions of displaced persons. We travel at high speed along one of Hitler's superhighways. We go around through the Western German area as far as we are allowed towards Berlin. This sign is only 1 mile from the Russian line. The once beautiful city of Cassel, with a population of over 300,000, was 80% destroyed by bombings. The Germans have long been known for their beet seed production, and the famous company of R&G have rebuilt in the British zone their former facilities, with Dr. Fritz Schneider at the head of it. He is devoting a lot of time to the production of new strains of triploid beets, which are characteristic in that they have thick, short leaves. The scientists hold a lot of promise for these new strains because of their vigor. In spite of hardships, the Germans are endeavoring to develop a machine harvester such as this 5-row beet lifter, which carries a harrow back of it to scrub off some of the dirt before the beets are thrown by hand into carts. Note the simple puller points. The beets are also topped by a 2-row horse-drawn machine, and the tops removed first, as it is considered a separate crop. Wood-burning tractors haul beets, as well as do horses, to the factory receiving station. And the beets are dumped through a tipping type of platform that drops the beets about 20 feet into a hopper. Then they are elevated up over flumes where they are stored for 2 or 3 days before slicing. Before the beets are dumped in this manner, however, they are sampled with an unusual tear sampling device that is built into an overhead electric-operated mechanism. A large plunger pushes down from the top through the load of beets, and with a hinged door on the bottom, lifts up a sample and puts it into a basket. A tear sampler has a lot of sliced beets in it and includes ordinarily about 125 pounds. We next travel to Paris, France, seeing the Seine River with the Eiffel Tower. Paris has its traffic as well as any other city of 5 million people, and for centuries has been one of the chief cities of Europe. The famous Arc de Triomphe is in a park along the Seine River and tells the former strength and beauty of this great nation. The famous Louvre is in the adjoining section of the park. Many oxen like these are used in farming in France. These are hauling a cart by the beet sugar factory at Vaucens. The farmer is proud of the tractor, which lifts 3 rows at a time in order to loosen them for the workers to pull into windrows. Here, the beets are loaded by this factory-constructed loader into trucks for hauling to the factory. The wagon is dumped and washed out by a stream of water in a wet hopper before going into the factory. Many of the beets at one factory then go by small cars which hold about 300 pounds, a distance of a mile to the factory, which is in a river bottom. The cars move quite rapidly, and the beets are washed before putting them into cars. The French Sugar Beet Institute held a colorful machinery demonstration where 11 countries were in attendance. A guard of soldiers stand at attention at the main entrance to this demonstration field. Many machines were shown to save labor, such as this clam shell, which loads carts, trucks, and wagons out of the field. The idea is to have the harvesters pile the beets midway in the field. About 8,000 people were attracted by the demonstrations, which included some 18 different types of beet harvesters, as well as a great many types and models of other equipment. The various machines were operated, and since most of them were in experimental stages, they performed, at least from an American viewpoint, not too well. The harvesting of beets mechanically in France is just getting started. But with all of the interest and with all of the machines, it appears that it is off to a good start to lessen the load of hand workers in the harvest. Some ideas might help American machines. And still, horse-drawn toppers such as this one were quite popular with the crowd and did an excellent job of removing the tops. The roots then could be lifted with a rather simple type of basket device machine. None of the French machines performed as well as the American-made John Deere, which greatly attracted farmers. The shortage of gasoline for tractor operations is shown by a wood-burning truck. Again, we take to the air and pass over northern France, where we see the fall colors of the orchards and trees of that beautiful country. We pass across the English Channel, through cottony clouds, and see below the choppy water that connects England and France. And pass rapidly on to Ireland, to a typical Irish farmhouse with a stone wall and a thatched roof. Men throw the beets by hand into small horse-drawn carts, by which they are hauled out to the highway. Trucks here pick the beets up and take them to receiving stations or the factory. Because of rain and wet soil, many farmers have to pull the beets and put them into what are called clamps with the tops to the outside. Do you think this fellow is hitting them together long enough? Trucks that do custom hauling have the beets washed out directly into flumes or into conveyors. We go to Tipperary and travel by many beautiful highways, seeing the very picturesque countryside along the streams in Ireland. There are many castles that are seen throughout Ireland, most of them not occupied since World War I, following the struggle to drive out the land barons. Many of these castles are several hundred years old. We see a lot of burros, such as this one, with a chap on the keg of Guinness Stout. Do you suppose it could be, or is it just domestic water for his home use? There are many gypsies also in Ireland that are handy men and go from farm to farm repairing and sharpening tools as well as doing odd jobs. We leave Ireland late in the evening as a cart of beet tops moves down the road. Bidding goodbye to Europe, we are soon over the Atlantic Ocean, seeing the reflection of the rising sun on the wings of the plane, arriving in New York early in the morning. We are reminded of all that America stands for and of the many things which we can well be proud of with our democratic way of life and the many things that men such as Lincoln have stood for. We can well and enthusiastically sing our powerful melody, America. And be thankful for the progress which we have made in mechanical production in eliminating much of the hard labor in sugar beet fields of the United States and Canada. It is in keeping with things accomplished in America in aviation, where huge bombers can carry tons of freight to Europe and back on non-stop flights.